think about how you think, right? So there are three phases to this, and that's how all this is developing. Is we're here, we're in the preparation stage, right? So the preparation stage is you take the clock off, and you're trying to acquire the mind of the writer. That's what this is all about. You're trying to acquire not the substance of what the writer knows, right? But you're trying to acquire the process through which the writer reasons, because that is the question. So again, it needs to make sense for you, right? But this is how, certainly in my life is gone. The first part of what you do is you got to prepare. I'm not worried about executing right now, right? I'm not prepared to execute. I have to prepare. So again, it goes to how much time do I need to spend on the appellate brief, like understanding the issues, trying to understand what the other side has said, really carefully trying to understand, because they're not trying to help me, right? How much time goes into that? A lot. And so when people say, well, how many hours a day or something should I study? Well, first of all, you shouldn't study, right? And second of all, you want to be a lawyer. So, you're not going to turn to your client and say, gee, how much time would you like me to spend on this? You're going to spend whatever time is required for you. You're different from me, and I'm different from you, and everybody's room is different, right? So there's no one mold here. But what is similar, right, is that you have to prepare until you're prepared. For some people, that's not going to happen. Now, I'm not necessarily saying some people in this room, but for some people, you get 3 months is not sufficient. Talk to me, right? And you have to embrace that. And you have to say, that's okay. That's not a big deal. It's only a big deal if I make it a big deal. But if this is going to be your life, and you're not willing to spend more than 3 months on it, what a pathetic life. I mean, what am I missing? It's like, go away, haunt somebody else's life. You want to do what I do, right? You want to do what Jim does. Well, you better step the fuck up. Because it's challenging. Most people don't do it. Yeah. But the first step in everybody's life here, right, is I got to know my case. So isn't it fair to say you need to know your case by analogy? Okay. And would it be fair to say some people will prepare to a greater degree than others? Well, who would you rather be when you took the test? The person who prepared or the person who didn't prepare? Right. And if you're sitting there and you don't know what you don't know, and you're sitting there, you're taking us as an established factor to something called logic games on this. Okay, I'd rather not be that person. I'd rather not, all things being equal, I just would rather not be that person. Not that that person will do wonderfully well. I would rather be that person, not be that person. So that's where we are. That will remain pretty much through this volume, right? But the purposes of 78 through 81 is say now, it's not just what Jim and I can explain in time available to us here, because we're also going to be doing written comprehension. We're also going to be doing analytical reasoning, right? There's an added resource which I believe will have greater value once you put in the initial time. Then we go to phase 2. Now phase 2 is, does everybody agree, think about this, that there's a difference between preparation and execution?
Yeah.
Think about it. It's really, again, the concepts to me are huge. They're not complicated, but there's no reason for you to think about this stuff in regular life. But as a lawyer, yeah, I've got to go through this middle phase. But no, I think I got it now. I think I got it, so I'm prepared. But I don't know that I've got it. And furthermore, even if I've got it, I can't take, does everybody agree we can't take the test in preparation mode? Because preparation, the clock is off. Right? You got me? Preparation is where, again, I don't know what these words mean, but I guess we're being cerebral. I don't know that I can be cerebral, but that's the preparation phase, right? That's when, I'm not leaving it until I understand. I'm not getting out of this room until I can repeat back to you what you said to me in my own words. I'm in this room. That's all there is to it. If that's inconvenient, go fuck yourself. Well, but that's what this is. Do you get it? I'm not leaving. So, yeah, Jim left the room earlier. Good for Jim. I'm Peter. But that's got to be on your heart. That's got to be in your DNA. And so, at some point, I got to execute. But execute now means I do care about the clock, right? I actually now do care about performing in a very different psychological way. In preparation, I'm never doing that. Why guys never going to be doing that preparation? I'm trying to understand, right? But when I'm taking the test, I want to do this as often as is responsible. Well, that's a transition. So here, say we go with exams 82, 83, 84. Say, I'm not sure we don't exactly, but say we do that, right? And we use exams 82, 83, and 84 collectively. We take one exam, right? Would it be fair to say that after you brief flaw issues and that after you brief assumption issues, you'd like some feedback on whether you're now ready to execute on those issues? Talk to me. Right, because you're not going in for an oral final exam, right? Nobody's going to say, just tell me what you know. No rush on the clock. Just tell me what you get. That's not going to happen, right? Okay. So would it make sense to you if in advance of taking full tests, we took, say, 82, 83, 84, and then Jim came in here and Jim said, I've extracted, say, 25 flaw issues, 25 examples, right, of the flaw issue from these 3 exams. Wouldn't that be analogous as though you had an entire section of flaw issues in one exam?
Yes.
And wouldn't you then also likely get a diversity of difficulty?
Yes.
Right, because some are going to be more straightforward, some are not going to be more straightforward, but you have a decent sized sample, yes? So if you took the 25 flaw issues in 35 minutes and you got an 8, would you have feedback?
Yes.
Is it the feedback you want? Well, 8 out of 25, well, it depends, but would it be fair to say you would prefer to have gotten more right? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay. But would that be really valuable information here as to whether or not you need to do more of that?
Yeah.
Of course it would. You with me? And again, the tests are they're endless. So I mean, we have 72 through 81 here. We have 62 through 71 in advance of that. We have 52 through 61 in advance of that. We have 42 through 51 in advance of that. You get, the material is probative and basically endless. Talk to me. So how is that different from researching a case? How is that different from researching the law? I don't get it. That's what we do. So if that's not going to float your boat, it's the wrong profession. At some point, you're going to reach fluency, yes?
Yes.
So when you reach fluency, there's no need. If I've reached fluency, right, and I'm only working on volume 72 through 81, right? Yeah, I would still go back to 62 through 71, right? And say, let me make sure I'm fluent. But you get, when you reach fluency, you let go because you're not trying to be perfect, right? And there's some other area you're not approaching because you're now transfixed in this one area. Where is Aristotle? So here, you take a 35-minute flaw test. You take a 35-minute assumption test. You take a 35-minute, and Jim's going to run out of time. Oh, I see. And so that means you can't do this on your own at home. It doesn't mean that at all. It means we're here to demonstrate how it's done. You with me? It doesn't mean that this is the only place you do it. Schmucks. No. No, but do you get it? You're not relying. What we're here to do is to demonstrate, right? What you're here to do is master what's been demonstrated, right? So that you own it. You're renting from me right now, and I'm going to be useless in your life in no time at all, because you don't need to rent from me what you own for yourself, right? I'm just saying that journey of going from renting from me to owning for yourself is not going to be casual for most people, because you're one of the lawyers. So does that make sense? So you got, now this is right. Okay. And now I'm done, but you guys got to take a test. So I can't just keep saying to you, oh, okay, we'll go back here. I can say that, but then I'm also going to be saying, forget about the April test. Right, forget it. At best, you're doing June, and you may not be doing June. Then when we get to the final 3 weeks or so, and remember, we're going to end on the week before the April test. I think today is like the 18th that we end here, right? And it says the 25th, I think, right? You don't have to declare readiness until June. You with me? So you finish here April 25th, and if you're in 18th, you're ready, you do it. You do it, right? You do it. You get in there, you do it. You make it happen if you're prepared. Right? But if not, you have all of May. Just to double down now on this area. Okay, if I'm not ready to execute, let me just go here, then go here. If I'm not done, go here, and there's no end to the material. Right? So the final 3 weeks, yeah. So if we take exams 86, 87, 88, right? And then full on, all class, take the sections. Then we get metrics that appear to me to be reliable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so we shouldn't touch those
Correct.
currently. Yeah.
Correct. The only thing, the highest number you should ever look at right now is 77. Right? There's no limit on going back. No limit going back. Generally speaking, the logical reasoning is reliable pretty much all the way back. I mean, you'd have to go a long way back. You know, if you go back to exam 23 or something, then you'll see it a little bit different. Not much different. Right? But if you start, if you went back, if you ordered all the volumes from, I would go back to, I'm comfortable in the 30s. I'm comfortable that the reading comp has never changed. All right.
Yeah, the 40s is when they start doing the comparative passages.
Yeah, well, the comparatives start at 52, 5.2. But the information prior to that, with the exception of it not having a comparative, is probative. So if you were working on flaw issues, assumption issues, if you're working in analytical reasoning, the material is valid, and again, it's just me now, so this is my inference, right? So I may be mistaken about this, but for me, as a recommendation, I'm trying to think where the volume would start. B volume, I guess it would be 32 through 41. I'm fine with that volume. That's a long way back. And I mean, I'm fine with all three sections all the way back to 32 through 41. And I can still remember some of the hypotheticals in the volume before that, which are fine. But obviously, the further back you go, the more attenuated the information is, right? So, but at no point does the information become counterproductive. At no point. So, you get to 3 phases. Talk to me.
Yeah.
So you still want to be lawyers?
Yeah.
How good is it going to feel? Now think about it for a second, right? Because that anxiety thing. How good is it going to feel to walk in there? You're still going to be nervous. You know, I'm not saying you're not going to be nervous, right? But to walk in there with a really grounded sense that you've out-prepared, with the exception of people in this room, that you have really out-prepared whoever it is that's sitting next to you. You get the self-esteem. Can you feel it? Can you feel like you own this? Which doesn't mean you're going to get a 98. It means you're going to law school. It means you've done what God will allow you to do because you put in the human effort and God will respect you. Hope. Right? But that doesn't come to everyone, you know. It's just, yeah. So then for next week, right, that's what I want to say. I mean, because Jim will have, you'll give him a wonderful day just by, oh, and by the way, thank you for being here. You'll give him a wonderful day just by showing up, right? But if you come in next week and it's just like relentless questioning, for us that's heaven. But you get for us that's heaven. You know, because when you don't have to be perfect, you can just be good, right? And we're prepared, so we'll be good. But that's the difference here is not anybody yelling at you. It's nobody being, getting your back up, or, you voted for Trump. I don't care if you voted for Trump. I care how you reason. But I don't care. I mean, God bless you. I don't care who you vote for. I care how you reason. And that really is what this is about. Yep. Okay. So, let me just get. So last week Jim worked with you on laws. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Assumptions. Anything else, or was that pretty much it?
He did one analytical reasoning question right at the end.
Okay, yeah, no, and I'll spend the last half of this class on analytical. So it's, what I'm trying is that time between now and then. So just going back to, look, all assumptions, if you just write this down and think about it, right? You say, well, on the LSAT, the established facts are, again, you want to put a slash mark everywhere there's punctuation. That's what I do. And that's what I do at work, right? In other words, when I get to a period, I put a slash mark there. So why am I doing that? It's complete thought, right? In other words, I'm trying to understand the writer. Are you with me? I'm not trying to read my own view into this. I'm not trying to get the writer to agree with me. I'm not trying to, I just want to understand what the writer wrote, and it's nothing personal. So the writer could be writing, Peter, you're a complete asshole. Well, but, then what I'm required to do is say, okay, well, I'm probably not going to agree with you, but I still have to understand you. And it can be really difficult to understand when you're upset. It can really be difficult to understand when you feel wrong. Do you get it? Talk to me.
Yes.
Right, you have to understand. And you may be wrong. So, in reading this, right, you put it, for me, I don't know if Jim, I think Jim does, but I don't know. But okay, put a slash mark after every period. Okay. Put a slash mark after every semicolon, or after every colon. Right, because I see a colon, I'm going to get a list. Right. If I see a semicolon, well, that means I should take a deep breath. Right. Now the comma is kind of like, all right, just pause. Right. But a semicolon is different. That's you want okay, a longer pause. That's all. So, if I'm trying to solve an assumption, then here's what I know, without exception. I know that what I'm offered here, there are two parts to this, right? Reasoning and conclusion. Nothing else. You with me? You're either reading the writer's reasoning or the writer's conclusion. There's nothing else in there, and it's critical to be able to tell which is which. That you're heavily tested on, and that issue, role in the argument, comes up about 3 times during the test. And while the issue itself is not heavily tested, this process is huge. So now, from now on, as you read, remember, we're preparing, right? So we're not saying to ourselves, well, I can't do this on the test because I'm going to run out of time. Because you're preparing yourself so that when you read with greater insight in less time, with a plan, which maybe I'm only answering 80% of the test. So, an assumption is, if you take it at its most basic level, it's a missing fact. Right? If you just take it there, and we'll build from there, right? But say, what is an assumption? Whether it's necessary or sufficient doesn't matter a whole lot initially, because they share the same characteristic. It's a fact that's not in that argument. Now that gets a little dicey, because what does it mean to say it's a fact not explicitly stated, which is how they define it? Okay, well, when you say it's not explicitly stated, you're saying there's no one sentence I can go to, right, that all this information is contained in. But I think it's that first class, right? As Jim pointed out, when you change terms, whatever that one he uses about, men with glasses are smart or whatever, right? But again, for lawyers, we repeat terms because, well, we're not trying to maintain the interest of the reader. It's not college, right? So, wouldn't you agree with me that if we're writing about John Doe, the most precise way to communicate information about John Doe is to keep repeating the name John Doe? Yeah? But of course, that's not how college works, right? Because if you write John Doe in the first sentence, you're likely to use a pronoun in the second sentence. Yes? Okay. But haven't you assumed the pronoun refers to John Doe?
Yeah.
John. That's all this is. So every time you change a term, you become less precise. Maybe for laudable reasons outside of law, but for no laudable reason within law. We're in the precision business. So one way they can test you on assumption is by giving you a term in the first sentence, right? And then in a subsequent sentence, the writer means to use the same term, but doesn't. But whatever term the writer uses in the second sentence has to mean what the term in the first sentence was, right? And if it doesn't, the argument's blown to hell. So, again, even the way you describe this, an assumption is something that's not explicitly stated. Somebody who's not reading with this kind of knowledge is going to perhaps assume that the he in the second sentence refers to the John Doe in the first sentence, right? And that person's saying, well, that's explicitly stated. Well, no, it's not. It's assumed. So when I test you for an assumption, does everybody get? I can put it right here. Talk to me, you see. Because the writer's stuck. In other words, if you understand what the writer's up to, right? No lawyer on the planet would change terms. We have a definition section, or we just keep repeating the same term. That's it. If the argument proceeds this way, and I require you to draw an inference. So we can use that cell phone example. If the phone, generally when your phone rings, right, and you haven't heard anything, you just heard the ring, would it be fair to say you infer there will be a voice on the other end?
Yes.
Right. Now, maybe your conclusion is, I'm going to identify that voice. In other words, maybe two steps. One is I'll hear a voice, right? And then the next is, and that voice will be Vicky's. Do you see that's a two-step process? Come down and be lawyers with me. Because it really is about being granular, right? They say, son of a bitch. You mean, I didn't just immediately get to it's Vicky because my first expectation is I would hear a voice. So because I haven't heard it, so it can't be established fact, right? So I'm inferring the voice. The next thing I'm inferring from that, but you get that's an inference, right? So I've already made one jump, and now I'm going to make a second jump, and the more jumps you make, the more attenuated your argument becomes. You see it? Because I can't conclude it's Vicky until I'm certain it's a what? A voice. But I don't know that it's a voice, because there may be nobody on the other end of the phone. You get it? So if I want to put an assumption here, well, that's what I'm going to do. Would it be fair to say if there is no voice, it cannot be Vicky?
Yes.
Right? If there is no voice, it's not going to be Vicky, right? So, haven't you assumed, if you say there will be a voice, if you say I infer there will be a voice, haven't you assumed there will not be silence at the other end of the phone? And isn't that an inference? And isn't that inference essential to your conclusion, which will be that Vicky's on the phone? Talk to me. You guys see it? Uh-oh. So if I want to do that, I can set an assumption underneath an inference where the inference is critical to the argument's conclusion. So it can be here, where you're just looking for changes in the language, right? So again, I think it's the misuse of a common term when it's internal. Just keep repeating the same language, or you have definitions. But without definitions, you have to keep repeating the same language. Here, I say, well, you can't get to point C without point B. But point B has to be inferred, yes? So I have to hear the voice before I can identify that it's Vicky, yes? So if I say I have assumed that there will not be silence, again, do we all agree I've obliterated the conclusion that it's Vicky, right? So assumptions aren't permissive. They're not helpful. They're essential. I can put it right under here. I can put it right under here. If I've assumed, on that hypothetical, let's take it to its conclusion. So I've assumed I'll hear a voice, and I've assumed that voice will be Vicky. Would it be fair to say my conclusion is I'm going to hear Vicky's voice? Yeah?
Yes.
But doesn't that rely on the presumption that Vicky's alive?
Yes.
Oh. Well, then haven't I assumed that Vicky's not dead? Oh, but I didn't give you any information about that, did I? I came in from out of the blue. No, right, you get? So you can look at the arms and say, son of a bitch, they didn't write anything about that. I don't have to write anything about that, because what I'm testing you on is, and you don't think that's relevant to law? Good God. So you haven't found out that the defendant has a ironclad alibi? Ironclad. There is no doubt that this person's testimony is they could not have been at the crime scene at the time you placed them at the crime scene, but you don't know what you don't know. And you go to trial on that, and son of a bitch, you hear for the first time, oh, my bad. But do you get, if I want to test you on assumptions, I can go for material that you can look till you're blue in the face, it ain't here, right? You can look till you're blue in the face and you're not going to infer she's dead, right? And then I can say, well, nevertheless, it must be the case that she's not dead for your conclusion to be correct. Yeah?
Yeah.
So it's just this, so I'm saying, don't you get this kind of requires you to take these assumption issues and go through this process and saying, I've got the answer. I've got all the reasoning. I've got the answer. How did that person get there? And the final thing is the conclusion itself can be wrong. So you always assume the non-contradiction of your conclusion, which is kind of basic, but and that'll be there if it's a level 1. And I'm testing you on, do you understand assumptions? Well, does everybody agree if my conclusion is the car is red, then I've assumed the car is no other color, right? So I can either make the answer the car is no other color, or I can make the answer the car is blue. Haven't I assumed the car is not blue? Yeah, I said the car is red, not blue, right? So that's it. The necessary sufficient thing, sometimes you just need one thing. You're trying a case and you have to prove 4 elements, right? So if you look at it this way, and you say, all right, I've got to prove element 1, element 2, element 3, and element 4, right? And then I get proof. Right? Okay. Well, if I prove this, and this, and this, then, and I sit down, I have an incomplete case, right? So the only way for me to cure that would be for which they're not going to do, but for the jurors to accept an assumption. So if you were presented with a case, right, that says, well, you need 4 things, right? I gave you 3. And you say, what has been assumed to make the conclusion valid? So again, when you're presented with a question, your job is to defend the conclusion. You with me? You're going to read an argument that has to be incomplete because you're being told it needs an assumption, right? But when you're reading, assumptions are the complete opposite of flaws. Assumptions are whatever conclusion you give me, I'm gonna make it, I'm gonna help it out, right? There are only 2 ways I can help it out. One is if I can identify this, right? And I say, well, you gave me 3 of the 4 things I needed, right? Well, would it be fair to say if you give me the 4th, I'm done? So if the reader infers that that 4th element was present, wouldn't you now have a valid conclusion? Talk to me. In other words, you're looking over here, right? And stated is, we have element 1, that's there, right? Element 2, that's there. Element 3, that's there, right? But then the conclusion is, and we've proven this person guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but nobody's mentioned element 4. Would it be fair to say that if you assume element 4 has been met, the conclusion would be valid? Talk to me.
No.
That's sufficiency. I mean, it's both necessary, you have to have it, right? So it's necessary, but is it fair to say there's no more work to do? That's sufficient. So all sufficiency means, right, is your conclusion now is unassailable. It's just unassailable. The whole bloody thing is complete, it must be true. That's sufficiency, right? And the way they present that to you is using the language properly inferred or logically inferred. They'll put the word assume in there, right? So every assumption issue, they use the word assume. Right? When they want sufficiency, they'll say, well, if this is assumed, right, what can be properly inferred? If this is assumed, what can be logically inferred? So it's like light bulbs go off. You're saying, okay, so what you're looking for is sufficiency, right? And I now understand that means one of these answer choices, right, if I put it in here, ends up being a must be true. Right? Whatever the conclusion was, yeah, you met all the, you told me here are your elements and you met them all. Okay. So that's reasonably clear. Necessity, you have two things you have to prove, right? So would it be fair to say that I have to prove both the third and the fourth element to get to validate the conclusion? Is that true? Are you correct? Talk to me. Okay. So let's say we stipulate that the third element is proven. Is it necessary that the third element be proven for the conclusion to be valid? Is that necessary?
Yeah.
Yeah, you bet it is. Is it sufficient? No, because there's still more work to do. So where's Aristotle? How's this complicated? You know, it's just slowing it down and adjusting yourself to the same language used in a different way, right? So necessity is, I absolutely have to have that fact. Like if I don't have that fact, my argument is lost. It's not weakened, it's obliterated, all right? But the mere fact that I have it doesn't mean my conclusion must be true. Yes?
What does it mean then about your conclusion?
You mean meeting a necessary assumption?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, if you have the third or fourth variable, you said well the variables, but it still doesn't mean your conclusion is going to be true. What can we say about your conclusion then?
No. I'm saying on an assumption issue, right?
Okay.
If there's only one more element that has to be shown,
Right.
and then somebody writes down here says, well, if we had shown this, what would have happened? Well, if we had shown this, the conclusion would have been complete, be valid. If there's more than one, if there's more than one thing that needs to be proven, but you do prove one, well, that's going to help it makes the conclusion more likely, but it doesn't make the conclusion a fact, because I'm still missing something here. So, you know, if you still have more work to do, then it's a necessary, and they're going to tell you what they want. So a necessary assumption, you're going to see the word assume or assumption, and it's going to be accompanied by the word depends, or the word requires, or the word necessary, or no word at all. So it's really just, and this is so law. It's like I'm giving to you, right, what in my prior life I would be able to do to, you know, most any criminal statute, which is I would be able to recite it, right? It never changed. And that's how they work. They say, well, we're not going to trick you. There are tricks here, right? We're going to require you to adopt our language. So a necessary assumption will have, without question, the word depends, the word requires, the word necessary, or no word at all, modifying the word assume or assumption. So once you see that, John, you know you're going to have an incomplete argument, right? Where they want you to have a complete argument and say, no, 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 this is done now. Now, you put an answer choice in there and the conclusion is something that must be true, right? Then they're gonna say the word, they're gonna use the word assume assumption, and they're gonna join it with logically inferred or properly inferred. Which of the following can be logically or properly inferred, or logically or properly concluded, right? If this is assumed. That's it. And again, have I mentioned this is law school? This is no one can do well without understanding the abstraction of this and the role the assumption plays in it. That's what they're testing you on, right? Then they put these ridiculous time constraints on, right? Which means for someone who thinks tactically or strategically, that'd be a lawyer, right? They're going to adjust to that and say, okay, all right, I got as much time as the person next to me, and I'm going to outperform those people. No matter how much brighter they are, I will outperform them. Which doesn't mean I'm going to score higher than them, just means I'm going to get to my ceiling while they remain at their floor. Great
So would
test.
the argument for the necessary assumption have less information in it then?
When you say less information, it kind of depends what that means. I would say it's conclusion, again, you don't have to argue with it. They're going to say to you, we want a necessary assumption, right? Whenever they say that, all you have to do is less information, more information, I don't know. But when they say I want a necessary assumption, right, all you're looking for is a fact, which would be either A, B, C, D, or E, right? They become facts, right? Which the conclusion requires, absolutely required, it's got to be there, right? And then that's the answer. But you then don't have to worry about, is the conclusion itself complete? It's not going to be complete, but you don't need to see that. All you need to say is, well, you know, if you're going to say, if you're going to tell me in advance that in order to commit a burg, the defendant has to, with the intent, enter a dwelling for the purposes of committing a crime therein, and you prove that there was intent to enter a dwelling, and you leave it there, then I know that one of the other elements has to be an answer choice, and I'm done. That would be in the real world. Here, they're just going to leave out something where you're going to look at it, and you can look at it one of two ways. You can look and say, yeah, that's got to be true. That's one way you say it's got to be true. The flip of that is you just say, well, if answer choice C is false, in other words, if that statement's an untrue statement, then the conclusion just got blown to hell. So there's no right or wrong way to approach. For me, I just go, okay, I'm looking for a statement that must be true. I just keep it simple, yeah. But it's beyond fair, right, to say what I'm looking for is, instead of looking for the answer choice that's true, right, it's not optional. That's got to be true. That's one way of looking at it, right? The flip of looking at it, well, if that's false, if that's not true, then the conclusion is obliterated. They're both valid, equally valid ways of approaching it. But I wouldn't worry about less information. I'm just saying everything is driven by the issue. The only reason I'm reading any of this is to solve the issue. All right. So go back over those assumption issues. I'll bet you the numbers you have there are higher numbers for the most part. Would that be fair? See, I'm going to infer what you've written down. Did you write down the question number itself?
Yes.
Okay. And so you see now what's going on here, right? Based on the facts of the conversation we've had, all right? Based on what I know of the LSAT, all right? But I don't know your strengths and weaknesses. So I wouldn't say this is an inference beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not. But I think it's an inference more probable than not. Okay? So you get the inference I'm drawing based on something I've never seen is that the numbers you have written down, a majority of them are, say, the numbers 14 and above.
That would be true.
And I would go a step further. I would say it's likely that a supermajority of them, 66%, are numbers 14 or above.
That would be true.
Okay. And welcome to the LSAT. All right. this is what they do. In other words, you can come to know this test, and you don't have to be. That's what I'm getting at. This is not, Creston, right? I've worked on every test they've done, right? Numbers matter. Numbers correlate with level of difficulty. So, in logical reasoning, again, you got to be precise. I'm not saying numbers correlate with difficulty in analytical or in reading comp. They don't. They strongly correlate in logical. So, if you have found that, because I didn't hear you say you wrote down the ones you got right. So I infer, if you look at the numbers assigned to the ones you got right, the reverse is true, that you got a supermajority of them right. And it stands for principle. And that's something, it's about the principle, right? It's not about this speculation. But the principle in logical reasoning is questions 1 through 12 have a much, much higher, much greater percentage of level 1 and level 2s in there than questions that are signed, say, from 17 through 25. I would say it's pretty striking, right? Where, say, once I get to 17, question number 17, no matter what the issue, it wouldn't matter. Do the same issue. Do what you do now, right? And when you break down flaws, and you break down strengthening and weakening, no matter what the issue is, would you agree if you kept seeing the same outcome? If what you were writing down you got wrong, a supermajority of the time were 14 and above, and what you were getting right a supermajority of the time were single digits up to number 12. Would you agree with me that that is information that can be turned into intelligence? You guys get it? That's all this is. All I do for a living is to take information, right? But your client, that's here, right? What your client wants is, but what can I infer from this? How is this any different from an account executive on the street, right? Who's taking information about the markets and taking data that everybody agrees that data is there. Everybody agrees what the 10-year note is, 10-year bond. The question is, what can you infer? What economic activity can you infer from that? And that's going to be based on some, basis of knowledge, right? But the skill is to take information that everybody has available and turn it into intelligence. So I just think it's, and now think about how that influences your plan, right? You want to say, well, when can I be confident in doing this? I'll bet you would have been confident in doing this on at least 1/3 of those assumption issues you got right that were signed numbers 1 through 12. And the only way you'll know what I suspect is by doing the work. How cool is that? And then you own it, and you don't need it. So again, it's one thing to say, well, I'm just bright enough I can get everything right. Well, that's not me. And the way I compensate for that is I think I'm pretty intuitive with the rest of the stuff. But that's based on preparation. So preparation is what you launch off of. You must prepare. None of this is going to matter if it's not on your heart. You don't want to walk. So that's with the assumption thing. And all you're doing on the flaws is, again, you're going to, where is the conclusion in the argument? Where is the conclusion? Stop, read, put those slash marks in there, right? And every time you do that, after you finish reading the argument, go back and break it down. And say, well, okay, but what was the roadmap? How did I get to Syracuse? In other words, what were the directions the writer used to get me to because I know where the destination is, I have the answer choices, right? And then what you're going to find is that the writer used evidence, right? And you're going to say, no, that was evidence. And that conclusion, yeah, it's in the second. The conclusion could be anywhere, right? And all you're saying in the conclusion is it's the thing being explained. That's all. One thing in an argument is being explained. Now, if you have multiple conclusions, it'll be, you'll have two more things. But on vast majority of these, there's just one thing being explained. And whatever the thing being explained is the conclusion. Again, where's Aristotle? But you probably have never read this way before, right? When's the last time you picked apart everything you're reading, saying, I want to know the conclusion in each and every paragraph? mean, you know, that's not what you do, but it's what lawyers do, right? And then when you're solving flaws and you're solving assumptions, it all pivots on the conclusion. Because for the assumption, you get that conclusion, you hug it, and you say, I'm going to make you real, no matter what you say, no matter how bizarre you are, right? I'm on your side, right? But if you know where the conclusion is, that's your starting point, right? And then you see the evidence, and it gives you insight as to what may be missing. Right? With the flaw, it's identical but reversed. So think about it this way. Every invalid assumption represents a flaw. Of course, every argument, I can write an argument and require you to identify an assumption, right? And then you're going through this process of saying, well, what's missing, that must be true, right, for the conclusion to be valid. But couldn't I take that very same argument, identify an assumption that must be true, and then make it a flaw issue by saying, I'm just going to flip it. I'm going to say, well, any unwarranted assumption is a what? Flaw. So if it's a warranted assumption, I make it an assumption issue, right? If it's an unwarranted assumption, I make it a what? A flaw issue. Now that's not the only way I can make it a flaw issue. But you see what I'm getting? Whoever writes this stuff could theoretically just write the text, could write the argument, right? Without having the issue in mind. And then say, okay, now let's play with it. So that, you know, what would show up on your test, the very same argument that could show up in your test as a flaw could show in somebody else's test as an assumption. Could show up in somebody else's test with weaken it. Or, I mean, what can you not weaken or strengthen? Right? So that, they're not testing you on this. Right? So that flaw, you're reading the conclusion, you're saying, the reasoning doesn't get me there. Now, theoretically, the conclusion could still be accurate, but you don't care about that, right? What you're saying is, you tell me it's flawed, right? Then you're telling me the reasoning that I've just read. That's the evidence. You with me? Reasoning is just the evidence. All that means is the evidence, right? The evidence seeks to prove something and has failed, right? And the flaw is the explanation for why it's failed. That's it. Okay, I can do that. And then I have my little buckets of flaws. So like I know where you're going to go when it's a level 1 or level 2. I may well know where you're going to go when it's 4 or 5. It's just going to be more difficult. And again, that issue of the flaw, there's very limited language. Right? They have to use the word erroneous or questionable or vulnerable or error. 1 of 4 words. Which eventually I'll start to forget and know it's time to stop doing this. But how do I know they want me to identify flaw? Well, because it's going to tell me. I'm going to see the word vulnerable, or else the word questionable, or else the word error. Right? Accompanied by the word reasoning or conclusion. That tells me, now when I read this, and I'm reading textually, that's when I say the slash marks me, that's textually. I'm going to take the evidence, I'm going to segregate the evidence from the conclusion because that's now how I'm reading, right? And I'm going to say, okay, here's what you've asserted. Got it. Here are the facts on which you rely. Got it. But the writer has told me this is flawed, so I'm not agnostic. Like, if I'm looking at that and I'm saying it's not flawed, well, that means the level of difficulty has been raised. Right? I say, but it is flawed. So let me stop for a second, and this is the analysis. What we're doing here is, you're doing the analysis before you look at the answer choices, right? And the more you practice this in advance, the greater the number of questions you're going to, you're going to see before ever looking at the answer choices. And if you don't do any of this, then you'll take the test with the skills you have as you sit here now. And that may or may not be adequate, but it's not the way to proceed. Again, I don't know who else out there, whether you've made a wise choice, you know, that I don't know. I mean, I think you've made an informed choice. But who else out there is committing themselves to 5 hours, you know, whatever, it doesn't matter what day of the week, but committing themselves 5 hours a day for 12 weeks, integrating that with an additional 12 hours of legal reasoning, and basically being told each and every time you're here to work your ass off. I doubt that's the dominant message out there. So, you know what I'm saying, if you do that, you're going to outperform who you're competing with, even if they're brighter than you are. Because, you know, they're actually not brighter than you are, because they're not here. So that's the flaw and the assumption. And it's just not, and all I wanted to do was touch it. And I look over there and it's like, you know, we're 2 hours into this. But it is what it is. So does that help on the flaw and the error? Well, you know, again, how to identify it, which is critical. That's issue identification. It never changes, right? The only other thing about the flaw is it can be a parallel flaw, right? To make it parallel, they either add the word parallel, right? Or they add the term most similar to. So it's the same thing. It'll just say, which of the following is a flaw parallel in its reasoning or similar in its reasoning to the flaw. Right. And there, it's more abstract because what you have to do there is you're going to be reading about an entirely different subject. So you may be reading about dinosaurs in the original argument, right? But they want parallel reasoning, which is analogous reasoning, right? So the answer choice is going to have, almost all the time, going to have nothing to do with dinosaurs. You may be reading about math teachers, right? The content doesn't matter. What matters is what was the flaw. So if the initial flaw was there was an underrepresentative sample, that's what you're reading for. In other words, if it's parallel flaw, right? What you got to walk away from the initial argument is to be able to articulate what was the flaw. So if you're saying it was an underrepresentative sample, that's what you're looking for. Then one of the 5 choices will proceed with an underrepresentative sample. If the flaw was causation and correlation, one of the 5 will have a flaw that's correlation and causation. Chances are when you do flaws, I would break these out. When you're briefing them, I would break out non-parallel flaws from parallel flaws. Non-parallel flaws generally, if you were to get 8 flaws, generally 6 of them are non-parallel and 2 are parallel. So the parallel flaw, which typically are assigned higher numbers, not always, but typically are assigned higher numbers, you know, they can be on your list. If during your preparation you're saying it just takes me too long to figure them out, and even when I take forever to try to figure them out, I get half of them wrong. Well, maybe that's on your do not disturb list. Meaning, you know, maybe don't disturb yourself with them on the test. You know, you should skip over them. Let somebody else get screwed up on them. But again, that's each path is different. Yes? Okay?